In 1991, a black priest was quietly dismissed from a diocese in southern Italy under strange circumstances, vanishing from church records and public memory alike. But 18 years later, after returning to his childhood home in rural Georgia, he unearthed a decaying cloth bundle in the garden, and what lay inside shattered everything he thought he knew about his past, the church, and the woman he had once sworn to protect. The train ride from Atlanta to Valdosta was quiet, long, and filled with a silence Father Abraham McKinley had come to recognize not as absence, but as a presence in itself. It was the kind of silence that tucked itself into the folds of a man's robe, coiled like smoke in the collar of his clerical shirt, and whispered to him in the voice of every regret he tried to leave behind in Rome. 18 years was a long time to be away, 18 years of unanswered letters, of being the shame of the archdiocese, of his name never spoken aloud within church walls unless it was to warn young seminarians of what happened when you questioned doctrine. He had not returned by choice. No one ever came back to South Georgia by choice. He came back because Rome had finally let him go. Not exonerated, not forgiven, just released. Discharged, deemed no longer a threat, whatever that meant. His collar itched. He didn't wear it much these days, but something about returning to the house he hadn't seen since Clinton was president made him feel like he should put it back on. He had tried to sleep on the train, but the dreams had returned, damp, green, heavy dreams of candlelight and locked doors and prayers spoken backward. The taxi driver who picked him up from the station was young, maybe 22, and didn't ask questions. Just glanced at Abraham in the rearview mirror a few times, maybe wondering if he was some kind of bishop fallen from grace or just a relic of a different century. "That your place?" the driver asked when they reached the old road lined with pine trees and the occasional rusted mailbox. Abraham only nodded. The house stood like it had been waiting. White wood faded to gray, roof patched with mismatched shingles, porch sagging like an old man's spine, and yet no graffiti, no broken windows, not even overgrown weeds in the front yard. It was eerily preserved, like someone had loved it just enough to keep it breathing, but not enough to bring it fully back to life. As he stepped out, suitcase in hand, the taxi already pulling away, the late afternoon sun cast long shadows over the gables. The wind smelled like pine and wet earth. Abraham turned the brass doorknob. It was locked, but the key under the loose porch plank was still there, exactly where he remembered. He hesitated for a moment, then opened the door. Inside, the air smelled of dust and lemon oil, like someone had cleaned recently. The furniture, his mother's rocking chair, the warm brown couch, even the ceramic angel lamp, was all still in place. A layer of dust clung to the windowsills, but the floors were swept, and the cross above the fireplace gleamed faintly as if it had been polished. Something was wrong. This house should have been swallowed by cobwebs and neglect, yet here it was, a ghost held upright by invisible hands. Abraham set his suitcase down and walked the perimeter of the living room, tracing his fingers over old photographs on the mantel. One was of him as a child, kneeling for First Communion. The other was newer, one he didn't recognize. It showed a woman in a nun's habit, holding a baby wrapped in white. The frame was newer than the others. He picked it up, turning it over. No inscription, no date, but the face of the nun tugged at something deep and long buried. He placed the photo back and moved to the kitchen. The fridge was unplugged, but empty, cabinets bare except for a few dusty mugs and unopened boxes of matches. The back door creaked when he opened it, revealing the familiar backyard. The swing set was gone, but the garden bed still had wooden markers, now faded to unreadable smears. A breeze carried the scent of soil, rich, dark, disturbed. The earth along the garden's edge looked uneven, as if someone had recently dug and refilled it. Abraham stepped off the porch and knelt by the dirt. He pressed his hand into it. Loose. Fresher than it should be. His stomach clenched. The same sick churn he'd felt the day they'd excommunicated him. No official trial, no ceremony, just a letter slipped under his door at the Vatican's guest residence. "You are no longer welcome among us." That was all it had said. 18 years ago, he had argued with the bishop over a ritual he refused to perform. He had said the words out loud, "This is not God's will," and that was all it took. They called him mad, said he had hallucinated, said the woman never existed, Maria D'Angelo, he whispered now to the wind, a name not spoken in nearly 2 decades, and yet the photo in his living room showed her face, holding a child, in this house. A dog barked somewhere in the distance. Abraham stood, brushing dirt from his knees. He needed answers, but first he needed to know who had been in his house, preserving it like a shrine. That night he slept in his old bed, though sleep was a generous word. The walls creaked like breathing lungs. Every sound made him sit upright. At 2:47 a.m. he heard the front door open and close, softly. He rose, heart pounding, but when he checked the house, it was empty. Nothing missing, just the air smelling faintly of incense. By the second morning, the Georgia heat had begun to rise early, already wrapping the yard in a thick layer of humidity by 7 a.m. Yet it was not the swelter that woke Father Abraham, but a smell, faint, sour, and unsettling. It wasn't the mildew of long unattended wood or the must of damp clothes. It was organic, rancid, the kind of odor that belonged more to a slaughterhouse or a forgotten cellar than a garden. It hit him the moment he opened the back door, subtle at first like a bad memory, then stronger as he approached the edge of the yard where the soil had looked disturbed. He stood on the porch, barefoot, staring at the patch of earth where the tomatoes used to grow, trying to rationalize. Perhaps an animal had died, buried itself, or a cocoon had unearthed something old. But the smell didn't have the wildness of decay. It was too contained, like something hidden poorly. He forced himself down the steps, shivering slightly as he stepped into the shaded part of the yard. The odor grew thicker there, clinging to the back of his throat. As a priest, Abraham had attended countless funerals, had stood beside the dying, had even ministered in morgues during his early years. He knew the scent of death. This wasn't compost or rotted roots. This was something deeper, older, and it carried with it a strange sense of familiarity that made the hairs on his neck rise. He crouched by the disturbed soil, running his fingers through the dirt again, and noticed something odd. The ground was still loose, despite no recent rainfall. Someone had moved this earth recently, and not just on the surface. He fetched an old hand spade from the tool shed, rusted but usable, and began to dig. Not quickly, each movement was deliberate, almost reverent. As the blade cut into the earth, he uncovered layers of mulch, then darkened soil, and finally something fibrous. His breath caught when the spade struck cloth. Not just any cloth, this was thick, coarse, and faded, but with traces of a once deep purple hue. Carefully he pulled at the edges. The soil resisted, as if it too wished to keep the secret hidden beneath. He cleared more dirt, revealing a tightly wrapped bundle, about the size of a torso, frayed and collapsed inward, as if whatever was inside had long since lost its shape. A knot secured the bundle with what appeared to be a rosary, but unlike any he'd seen in common parishes. This one was black, not plastic or wood, but some kind of polished onyx, cold to the touch even under the southern sun. The crucifix was old, its edges dulled from handling, but the design was unmistakable. The emblem of the Sacred Heart etched into the back, surrounded by thorns. It was the kind given only to senior nuns who had taken final vows, women of lifelong service, and it was wrapped around what he now knew could only be a body. His stomach turned as he reached for his phone, hesitated, then set it down in the grass. No signal. He was still outside the range, just like always in this part of the county. He looked back toward the house, considering whether to call the sheriff or a coroner, but something, perhaps instinct, perhaps fear, rooted him in place. He untied the rosary and pulled open a section of the cloth. Bone, human bones, mostly collapsed into themselves, but the curve of ribs, the shape of a femur, the delicate structure of a hand, all visible. And something else, just beneath the ribs, nestled in the rotting fabric, a small silver locket. He lifted it, trembling, and opened it. Inside was a single black and white photo. A woman, the same woman from the picture on the mantel. Maria. Abraham fell back onto the dirt, heart racing. It wasn't possible. She had died, he had seen the blood. But the Vatican had never confirmed her body. They'd told him she had run away, a euphemism that covered countless sins. But now here she was, or what remained of her, buried in his garden. He looked at the rosary again. A cold breeze passed out of place for the stifling Georgia air. He shivered. The air carried not only the smell of death now, but the undeniable weight of something watching. Not an animal, not even another person, but a presence, ancient and familiar. He felt as though he'd opened a tomb meant to stay sealed, disturbed a memory God himself had chosen to bury. He whispered a prayer under his breath, not for the dead, but for himself. The black rosary glinted in the sun, still cold, still heavy, as though it carried more than metal and beads. He stood, eyes scanning the tree line, the house, the sky. Everything looked the same, but nothing felt familiar anymore. He picked up the bundle again, more gently this time, and realized something else beneath the cloth was not just bone. There were papers, protected in a wax-sealed envelope, pressed flat beneath the skull. He slid them free. The seal bore the insignia of the Vatican Curia. It wasn't just a burial, it was a cover-up. He hadn't just found a body, he had unearthed a secret. And as the wind died and silence fell again over the yard, he felt the shift, a rustling in the trees, the faintest echo of whispered Latin, not from memory, not from within, but somewhere nearby. The discovery had shaken Father Abraham to his core, but it also lit a fire beneath the thick fog of confusion that had hovered since his return. He spent the remainder of that day sitting on the back porch, the wax-sealed envelope unopened on the table beside him, the rosary tucked in the inner pocket of his cassock, and the dirt from the garden still clinging to his fingernails. He didn't sleep that night, not really, just dozed in and out of memories and prayers, waking every hour to check the backyard for signs of something. Anything. But the night remained still, eerily so, until the sun broke over the tree line and painted the world gold again. That morning, he made a decision. If there were secrets in this town, he would find them. And secrets, like rot, always began with the neighbors. The first person he spoke to was Mrs. Langston, who lived 2 houses down and had been there since before his mother passed. She was pushing 90, nearly blind in one eye, and walked with a walker reinforced with tennis balls, but her memory was razor-sharp when she wanted it to be. Abraham found her watering dead petunias on her front porch, humming an old Baptist hymn. "Mrs. Langston," he said gently, approaching with his hands visible, as if his collar might scare her. She looked up, squinting. "Well, I'll be—" "You're Sarah McKinley's boy," she said, voice raspy but steady. "The priest. The one who went overseas?" He nodded. "Yes, ma'am. I've just come back, temporarily, I think." She nodded slowly, then tilted her head. "I thought I heard someone was back in that house. Always liked your mama. Strange woman, but good." He smiled politely, then leaned in. "Mrs. Langston, did you ever see anyone come by my place while I was gone?" "Anyone unusual?" Her lips pursed, and for a moment he thought she might not answer. But then she said, "I don't see well anymore, not since the stroke, but there was a girl, a nun, I think, dressed in black, wore a scarf over her head. Walked like she was in pain." Abraham's heart skipped. "When? Must have been 2009, maybe 2010. I remember because that was the year the cicadas came early. She didn't stay long, just stood by the porch like she was waiting. Had a little round belly on her too, you know, like she was expecting." Abraham stared. "Are you sure? I may be old, Father, but I know a pregnant girl when I see one, and she was no child. She was a woman with a weight on her shoulders." She paused, not loud, just stood there and cried for a long time, then left. Never saw her again. Abraham felt his mouth go dry. "Did she speak to you?" "Didn't see me. I watched from behind the curtain. People don't like to be caught grieving." He thanked her, heart thudding, and walked slowly back home, every step like sinking into mud. A pregnant nun in 2009. That was 3 years after he'd been forced out of Rome. If Maria had come here, why? And why alone? The bundle in the ground hadn't contained any infant remains. He would have known. The thought chilled him. He placed the envelope into a drawer and stepped back out into the world. Downtown Valdosta hadn't changed much in 20 years. The gas station still had the same cracked neon sign, the diner still served coffee that tasted like burnt wood, and the local mechanic's son, now the mechanic himself, was still perpetually covered in grease. Abraham walked the streets in his priest attire, which earned him a few stares, a few nods, and one muttered insult from a group of teenagers on bikes. At the diner, he sat at the counter and ordered coffee, black. The waitress, a woman in her 40s with bleached hair and a faded cross tattoo on her wrist, looked at him twice before asking, "You the priest that just moved back?" He nodded. "Father Abraham thought you were dead," she said casually, pouring the coffee. "People say that a lot," he replied. It wasn't until he got up to leave that a young man approached him near the door. He was no older than 25, tall, tan, with a nervous energy that made him twitch slightly as he spoke. "Excuse me, sir," he said. "You're Father Abraham, right?" Abraham nodded. "Yes." The man shifted. "This might sound crazy, but I think I met you before." "Years ago?" Abraham tilted his head. "When?" 2013, I think. I was walking through a bad time, hanging with the wrong crowd, doing dumb stuff. There was this night. I was walking past your mom's old house, drunk out of my mind, thinking I might steal something. I saw you on the porch." "You called me by name," said Eli. "Turn back now. This road only leads to ash." "I thought I imagined it, but I never touched a drink again after that." Abraham felt his blood turn to ice. "You're sure it was me?" "Positive. You had the same face, same voice. It was dark, but I'll never forget it." Eli swallowed hard. "I was in Italy in 2013. I haven't been here since 2005. Eli's expression twisted in confusion, then fear. "But it was you, I swear it. My mom saw you too, said you looked older." Abraham stared at him, unable to speak. "Anyway," Eli added, backing away slowly, "just thought you should know." The rest of the day passed in a haze. Abraham sat on his porch as dusk fell, watching the cicadas swarm the trees, listening to the wind rustle the high grass. He hadn't been in this town in nearly 2 decades, yet people were remembering him here, seeing him here. Years after he'd left. Either someone was seriously wrong. He retrieved the wax-sealed envelope, fingers trembling, and opened it with a knife from the kitchen drawer. Inside were 3 pages, handwritten in Italian, with the seal of the Holy Office pressed into the corner. He read the first line and felt the world tilt around him. Subject: Maria D'Angelo, termination approved by order of the Congregation for the Doctrine of the Faith. Execution to be carried out discreetly. Report all outcomes to Office of Records, Vatican Internal Security. He read it again and again. And then something crashed at the back of the house. A shatter of glass. A scream. Not from memory, not from imagination, but from the shadows at the edge of his yard. The scream shattered the stillness like a stone through stained glass, and Father Abraham sprinted around the side of the house, heart pounding, only to find nothing. The back window to the kitchen was broken, glass scattered across the floor, but there was no sign of entry, no blood, no footprints in the dirt outside, only the echo of that voice. High, female, anguished, and the whisper of wind rustling through the trees as though mocking his confusion. He stood there for minutes, perhaps longer, too afraid to move, the pages of the Vatican document still clutched in his hand, the wax seal smeared with sweat. That scream, it wasn't memory, it wasn't dream, it had been real. Just like the photograph, just like the dirt, just like everything else since he came back to this cursed place. He stepped back into the house, locking every door and closing the curtains, unsure whether to feel safer or more trapped. His mother's old room, now his by default, still carried the scent of lavender and mothballs, but the atmosphere had shifted. It was no longer just a relic of childhood and grief. It was a container of secrets, a prison of forgotten hours. Unable to sleep, he decided to clean. It was an excuse, really, a desperate attempt to do something, anything, that didn't involve thinking. He started with the closet. Boxes labeled Sarah and Abraham School were shoved to the back behind old coats and a suitcase with a broken wheel. One box was heavier than the others and tucked beneath a layer of quilts. Inside was an old leather-bound Bible, thick, with hand-sewn binding, older than the others he'd seen in the house. He opened it, expecting to find family genealogy or baptism records, but the moment he turned past the title page, he felt his blood run cold. Several pages in the book of Revelation had been violently slashed, not torn or crumpled, but cut with a blade, each passage obliterated, and in their place a handwritten message scrawled in dark ink. "She is his blood." The handwriting wasn't familiar, but the phrase made something in his stomach clench. He flipped further, finding notes tucked throughout, symbols, fragments of Latin prayers, names he didn't recognize: Agatha, Clementine, Maria, and dates going back decades. He took the Bible to the bed and read the message over again. She is his blood. Not my blood, not the blood, his. The capital H, a divine reference. It was language used in doctrine, but twisted. Was this about Maria? About the child Mrs. Langston had seen? About the one in the photograph? His thoughts spiraled until something tugged at him. The statue. The one on the dresser, a small porcelain figure of the Virgin Mary holding infant Christ. It had always stood there since his mother's time. He reached behind it, feeling for dust, maybe a dropped earring, when his fingers brushed paper. Tucked in the hollow beneath the base was a Polaroid. He pulled it free slowly, the edges sticky with age, and turned it over. He dropped it immediately, then snatched it back up. It was him. Younger, yes, but unmistakably him. Same jawline, same eyes, same slight tilt of the head when he smiled. And next to him, her. Maria, her hand resting on her swollen belly, her veil blowing back slightly in a breeze, revealing a softness to her features that no formal portrait had ever captured. She was pregnant. Visibly, obviously pregnant. And he was smiling. One arm around her shoulders, the other hand touching her stomach gently, protectively. The photograph looked candid, intimate, full of joy, not posed or manipulated. But he had no memory of it. None. He sat down hard on the edge of the bed, Polaroid in one hand, slashed Bible in the other, and tried to breathe. He hadn't seen Maria after the incident at the monastery. That night, Rome 2005, was the last time. Or had it been? Had something been done to his mind? Drugs? Hypnosis? Could they have taken her from him and buried not only her body, but his memories with it? He shook his head violently. No, that was madness. And yet, there it was. Evidence in his hands, a timeline that no longer fit, an identity fractured. And behind it all, a force that moved pieces like a chessboard only it could see. The black rosary he had found was still in his pocket. He pulled it out, ran his fingers across the beads. They were cool again, almost cold. Not like plastic or stone, but like metal hidden in a crypt. He stood, suddenly needing to leave the room, needing air. But before he reached the door, he heard it again. A whisper. Not outside, not in his head, in the house, somewhere near. He followed it down the hallway, past the picture frames of his mother and his childhood drawings, toward the attic ladder. The whisper stopped. He pulled the cord, the ladder creaked down, and he climbed, every rung groaning beneath his weight. The attic was musty, full of insulation and old trunks, but there was something new now. A red candle had been burned recently, the wax pooled on an old prayer rug, and on the far wall, drawn in what looked like ash, a message. She carried divinity. He didn't remember writing it. He didn't know who had, but as his eyes adjusted, he saw one more thing. A child's shoe. Small, white, tucked beside the candle. Not dusty, not aged. Fresh, as though someone had left it for him to find. The child's shoe had not been there the day before. Father Abraham was sure of it. It was clean, white, almost new, with a small embroidered cross on the strap and a faint scent of rose oil, the kind often used in baptism ceremonies. He stood in the attic staring at it, torn between the rational and the unreal, between the decaying Polaroid in his pocket and the fresh cotton before him, both screaming of a past he had been told to forget, and a present that refused to let him move on. He carried the shoe back downstairs, setting it on the table beside the blood-marked Bible and the Vatican letter, a shrine of the unexplainable. That night he did not sleep. Instead, he searched online forums, old blueprints of the house from city archives, anything that might give him a clue to what lay beneath the surface of this quiet property. At 2:17 a.m., he stumbled across a university study on heat mapping for pre-Civil War houses in the South, including outdated thermal scans submitted by amateur historians trying to locate underground shelters, prohibition cellars, even rumored Confederate tunnels. His fingers trembled as he clicked through a heat mapping tool, inputting his home's address with low expectations. The system was crude, outdated, but it generated a rudimentary thermal overlay using old data cross-referenced with estimated geological changes. And there it was. A section in the backyard, beneath the garden stretching slightly into the house's foundation, was blue. Cold, unnaturally so. Not shaded by trees, not lowered in elevation, simply and undeniably colder than any other part of the property. The color pulsed on the map like a heartbeat, slow and steady. A hidden space, a cavity, a secret. Abraham stared at it until sunrise, then printed the map and took his spade back to the yard. The digging was slower this time. He wasn't unearthing bones or fabric, not yet. He was searching for entry, for access, for anything that might lead underground. After hours of nothing, he returned to the house, sweating and caked with dirt, and began knocking on the floorboards in the kitchen with the handle of the spade, listening for a hollow tone. He moved methodically, rhythmically, until one board gave a muted thud, different, deeper. He dropped to his knees and pried it up, revealing a narrow hatch with rusted hinges and a metal loop set into its center. The hinges screamed as he pulled it open, revealing a short set of stone steps descending into darkness. No smell, no light, just cold. Bitter, unnatural cold that climbed up his arms before he even took the first step. He descended slowly, the rosary in his pocket suddenly heavy, like it didn't want to be near whatever lay below. The air thickened around him, not dusty like an old cellar, but damp like a sealed crypt. The walls were stone, uneven, too carefully cut to be natural, but too crude to be modern. It was older than he expected, older than the town. At the bottom of the steps, the tunnel opened into a small chamber. He flicked on his flashlight, the beam cutting through the dark to reveal shelves of rotted wood, a rusted baptismal font, and on the far wall, a large crucifix, inverted and scorched at the center. It wasn't sacrilege, it was theater, designed to frighten or send a message. He approached the font and saw something floating in the water, a scrap of cloth. He pulled it out slowly, unrolling it with shaking hands. It was the sleeve of a nun's habit, the fabric stiff with dried blood, the hem embroidered with initials, M.D. D.A. Maria D'Angelo. Beneath the cloth lay something heavier, metallic, a crucifix, bent, the figure of Christ eroded, his face nearly worn off. Abraham turned it over. A message had been carved on the back, faint but legible. Maser Bortuto. He whispered the translation aloud, heart cracking with each word. They forced me to call it a demon. The handwriting was hers. He recognized the loops, the way she crossed her tzith. It was Maria's confession, not written in a diary or left in a letter, but carved in pain into metal, a last testament to something terrible. The chamber was too still, too staged, as if someone had preserved it, like a warning or an altar. He looked around, eyes adjusting. There were bones here too, not complete, just fragments, a finger bone near the wall, a kneecap half buried in the corner, and ash, so much ash. Piled in neat mounds beneath the shelves, like incense burned too long. He moved deeper into the shadows and found another passageway, narrower, marked by a wooden door barely hanging on its hinges. Symbols were carved into the wood, Latin, Hebrew, even Greek, words of binding, of silence, of penance. He touched the door. It creaked open with a groan that felt like a sob, and inside the narrow passage beyond the scorched crucifix, the air grew colder still, and Father Abraham's breath clouded with every exhale. The walls were tighter here, the ceiling lower, making him duck as he walked. The corridor smelled of old incense and something faintly metallic, like rust and dried blood. He found another door, iron this time, bolted from the outside, and though he tugged, it wouldn't budge. No sound came from within, but the stillness it radiated was suffocating, like a sealed tomb. He backed away slowly, every instinct screaming at him that whatever was behind that door had been put there for a reason. As he emerged from the underground chamber and closed the kitchen floor behind him, stealing the hatch with trembling hands, dawn was breaking through the trees, staining the windows gold. That morning, as if summoned by the very secrets now unraveling, an envelope arrived in the mailbox, postmarked from Florence, Italy, with a return name he didn't recognize, Lucia Ventresca. Inside was a letter, handwritten in elegant cursive, and several copied pages from an old bound journal, dated 2005, bearing the header Convento di Santa Croce. In the letter began, "Reverend McKinley, I hope this reaches you in time. My name is Lucia. I was once a postulant at Santa Croce. I found these pages hidden inside a hollow behind the altar when the chapel was being restored. I recognized your name and remembered what happened. I recognized you deserved to know what they did." Abraham's hands clenched the paper, the veins in his wrist tightening as he read on. The copied pages were portions of a journal written by an unnamed nun, though the tone and writing matched something he now suspected had always been Maria's nun. One entry from June 2005 stood out like a knife through silk. To say he has defied the right. Father Abraham refused to speak the final words. He says the girl should be protected, not offered. They have turned on him. They say he is possessed by doubt, but I know he is right. There is no divinity in this bloodletting. It is not sacrifice. It is murder. He set the page down, lungs struggling for breath. The words hit him like a revelation long denied. He hadn't imagined it. The ceremony he'd interrupted wasn't a dream or a psychotic break. It had been real. They had tried to perform a ritual that no Christian doctrine should ever permit, and when he spoke against it, they buried him in silence and shame. The journal confirmed everything, his memory, his resistance, and the existence of Maria as the one woman who stood beside him. The next page bore a name, a full name, Sister Maria D'Angelo. The same entry that named her detailed her fate. She is with child now. They say it's a stain upon her vow, but I believe it is salvation. She says she will run. She says there is a woman in America who will help her, the mother of the man she trusts. His mother. The journal referenced a letter sent to a Mrs. Sarah McKinley, a plea for sanctuary, for help, for mercy. Abraham staggered to the living room, pulling open drawers. In the bottom of a locked box, beneath tax forms and a birth certificate, he found it. A worn envelope addressed from Italy, dated November 2005. The handwriting shaky, the ink faded, but unmistakably Maria's head. He tore it open with shaking fingers. "Dear Sarah," it began, "I pray this letter finds you before they find me. I am with child, and they have called it unholy. Abraham tried to protect me, but they silenced him. I have nowhere else to turn. I was told you once said if ever I needed refuge, your door was open. I beg you, for the sake of this child, for the soul of your son, please let me come." There was no reply letter in the box, no confirmation, just the envelope, sealed in secrecy. Had his mother seen it? Had she helped? Or had she been too afraid? Or worse, had she been silenced too? The question burrowed deep, gnawing at him as he sat in the kitchen, surrounded by fragments of a past that no longer felt like his own. He reached for the child's shoe again, brushing its fabric, wondering if she had ever worn it, wondering if she had ever even been born. The sun climbed higher, but the cold in the house did not lift. Something had shifted, something had opened, and as he stood to light a candle for Maria, for the truth, he heard it again. That voice, not a scream this time, not even a whisper, just a single word, distant yet echoing with familiarity. "Pad." The voice that called out "Pad" dissipated before Father Abraham could trace its source, echoing through the old wooden beams like a breath through bone, but the chill it left behind settled deep in his marrow. He wandered the house until sunrise, candle in hand, unsure whether to follow the sound or pray it never returned. Sleep had long since abandoned him, replaced by a kind of sacred insomnia, his body weary but his soul unbearably awake. At first light he drove to the sheriff's office, the remains he'd reburied in the garden gnawing at his conscience. He told them he had unearthed bones while clearing old brush, half-truths, measured confessions. They dispatched a forensic team, collected the remains, and promised results within the week, though Abraham already knew what they would find. When the call came 3 days later, the voice on the other end was careful, clinical, strained. "Reverend McKinley, we ran the mitochondrial DNA analysis on the remains. The bones belonged to a female, approximate age late 20s to early 30s. But There's something unusual. We compared the sample with the blood you left for family matching. The DNA match came back at 99.9%. You and the deceased share nearly identical markers. Abraham gripped the phone tighter. What does that mean? It means the remains are either your twin or your biological offspring. The room spun slowly, not violently, just enough to remind him that gravity held more than bodies. It held truths. Impossible truths. Maria's body in the ground, Maria's photo on the mantel, Maria's name in the journal, and now Maria's child. But if those bones weren't hers, if they were someone else, then who had he buried? And if they were hers, then the 99.9% could mean only one thing. His knees buckled beneath him, and he sank to the floor, pressing the phone to his ear like a rosary, waiting for the voice to continue. We're running further analysis, the coroner said, but this level of genetic similarity suggests you are the father. I'm sorry if this comes as a shock, Abraham whispered. Thank you, then hung up, the words falling from his lips like ash. That night, he returned to the attic, to the boxes untouched since childhood. He sifted through school records, baptismal certificates, tax returns, until he found an envelope yellowed with age, wedged behind a false panel in the trunk. It contained a folded sheet, soft with time and nearly torn in half across the center. A birth certificate. The name at the top, Angelica Maria, born mother, Maria Dialogo, father, blank. He stared at the space where a name should have been, a blank that screamed louder than any confession. The hospital seal was faint but visible, Our Lady of Mercy, Atlanta. The address listed was his mother's. He ran his fingers over the paper, trying to imagine Maria alone in a sterile hospital room, clutching this form, afraid to name him, perhaps forbidden to. His thoughts raced back to the letter she'd written to his mother, begging for shelter. Had Sarah McKinley taken her in? Had she delivered the baby in silence, hidden her from the world? And if so, what happened next? There was no crib in the house, no baby photos, no sign of a child ever living there. Had the church found out? Had they come as they once came for him, to erase another name from the book of the living? He staggered to the kitchen, birth certificate in hand, opened the drawer where the Vatican envelope still rested, and compared the signatures. Maria's name, twice written, matched perfectly, on the certificate and on the back of the bent crucifix. Her final words and her daughter's beginning, both etched in ink that now felt eternal. He returned to the floorboard above the hatch, pried it open again, and descended into the cold, clutching the paper like a torch against the dark. This time, he wasn't looking for bones. He was looking for proof that Angelica Maria had existed, that she still did. In the second chamber, he examined the walls for clues, for childlike scribbles, toys, clothing. And there, beside the baptismal font, he noticed a small indentation in the stone, barely large enough to hold a shoebox. Breaking the seal, he found more photographs, blurry Polaroids of a child, dark-haired, eyes wide with confusion, each one dated in neat script. 2007, 2008, 2009, then nothing. The last image showed the girl in front of a white house, his house, reaching out toward someone outside the frame, someone with a familiar shadow. His. The photograph of the girl reaching toward him refused to leave Father Abraham's mind. Every detail of the faded Polaroid felt like a whisper from the part of his past he was never meant to remember, a message from a life that had existed briefly in the shadow of obedience and now echoed through every room in his crumbling home. He placed the plastic case back in the niche, covering it gently with cloth as if tucking away a sacred relic, and climbed out of the chamber. Once above ground, he made for his desk and opened the box of records Lucia Ventresca had sent from Italy, searching for anything that could explain why he remembered so little from 2006 onward. Among the documents was a sealed file marked Confidenziale, Congregazione per la Dottrina della Fede, stamped with a crest he knew all too well. Inside were typed pages in Latin and Italian, memoranda between members of the Vatican's internal tribunal, describing a series of events labeled Sotto Individuate. His name appeared twice, both times in reference to Resistenza non canonica e una funzione speciale. And in one note, bluntly, Frank McKinley refuses to participate in the preservation rite, claims ethical violation, demands public inquiry, recommends psychological evaluation, and provisional silence. That phrase, provisional silence, turned his stomach. It wasn't the kind of silence born from prayer or penance. It was bureaucratic, weaponized. The accompanying form was even more disturbing, a medical schedule dated from July 2006 to March 2008, mistered monthly injections administered by a doc. Lorenzo B., for disturbic cognitivi post-liturgicus, a euphemism for memory suppression. The English note at the bottom was more blunt. Subject exhibits signs of obsessive resistance to tradition, prescribed low-dose benzodiazepine and intermittent ketamine under review. Diagnosis: post-ministerial neurotic depression. Abraham's fingers shook as he read the last line. To be administered under general consent, provided 2006 under Ecclesiastical Emergency Clause 48. Patient unaware. He stood abruptly, breath caught in his throat, a wave of nausea rising as the reality settled over him. They had drugged him, month after month, under the guise of care. They had stolen years of his mind, blurred the edges of truth until he couldn't tell if Maria's child had ever been real or if he had simply become the final piece in a long, cruel chess match designed to erase her entirely. And yet, there she was, Angelica, in a photo, in a birth certificate, in the soil, real. The doorbell rang. He paused, confused. Few people came to this house unannounced. When he opened the door, a courier handed him a package with no return address. Inside was a small black envelope containing a single USB stick. He plugged it into his old laptop, and a folder opened. Dozens of video files appeared, some dated as early as 2003, all filmed in dimly lit rooms with high ceilings and flickering candles. He opened the file labeled 21.035_Rito Noturno. The screen showed a chapel. He remembered it. The circular stone altar, the vaulted ceiling painted with saints whose eyes had long faded into indistinct stares. In the video, 4 figures in white stood in a half-circle while a fifth, veiled in black, was led forward. Chants in Latin echoed low and rhythmic. The woman knelt. Then the camera panned to him, younger, his face strained, angry. And then his voice. "This is blasphemy. She is not a vessel. She is a person. You will not do this." The video cut abruptly. Abraham shut the laptop, heart hammering. It was real, all of it. They had tried to make him forget, but the truth had always found ways to survive, buried in gardens, etched in metal, whispered in dreams. He remembered that night now with piercing clarity, the way Maria trembled, the way the others looked at her, not with pity or compassion, but reverence tinged with fear, as if she were the instrument of something older and darker than Christ. That was the moment he had broken ranks. That was when the Vatican marked him for erasure. He reached for his phone, dialing Lucia's number from the envelope. When she answered, her voice was cautious. "You saw the files?" "Yes," he said. "I need to know everything. What was that, right?" A pause, then, "It's called the Sacramentum Sanguinis, a pre-schismatic ritual condemned in the 4th century. It was believed certain women could carry vessels of divine blood. The rite required purity, silence, and ultimate sacrifice." They were going to kill her? Not openly, but yes. It's a rite of transference. They believed if she died at the moment of spiritual climax, her child would carry the blood of heaven. And they made me forget? They made you complicit, and when you refused, they buried you in silence. He hung up, hands trembling. Everything inside him screamed for retribution, for justice, for truth. But something else stirred now too, something deeper. He hadn't just been lied to, he had been used. And so had Maria. So had Angelica, if she was still alive, if they hadn't taken her too. He turned toward the closet where his old vestments hung, in moth-eaten solemnity, and among them something new, folded neatly, pressed recently, a white baptismal robe. Not his. Child. With initials stitched faintly in the lining. A. The baptismal robe still hung in his closet when the coroner called again. Father Abraham answered with a voice already half expecting doom, his mind having swirled with worst-case scenarios since the DNA results, but nothing had prepared him for the grim details spoken with clinical calm. Further examination of the remains revealed the presence of fetal bone material within the ribcage of the deceased. We also found significant dirt in her lungs and throat. Cause of death: asphyxiation consistent with live burial. There was a long pause before the coroner continued. We believe she was buried alive. The child, approximately 7 to 8 months gestation, was never delivered. The bones suggest a female fetus. Both died likely within minutes of burial. Abraham leaned against the wall, the pressure in his chest growing unbearable. The image of Maria gasping for air under layers of earth searing into his thoughts. He closed his eyes, whispering fragments of songs, but they offered no comfort. This was not a passing into grace. This was murder, calculated, ritualized, covered. The girl's name echoed through him now. Angelica Maria, never born, yet haunting every corner of his life. And her mother, once full of light and conviction, reduced to silence under the soil of the very place that should have been sanctuary. He hung up the phone in silence, then returned to the table where he had laid out every relic of this unraveling horror. The torn birth certificate, the rosary, the journal pages, the photos. Among them was the old garage key. He hadn't been inside since returning, the place too filled with the smell of oil and dust and memory. Now it called to him like a confession. He walked through the backyard, the same path the man in the footage would have taken, and unlocked the garage. The air inside was thick, untouched. Boxes and rusted tools lined the walls, and in the far corner, covered in canvas and cobwebs, sat an old surveillance system, his father's from the early 2000s, long forgotten and probably useless. But when he pressed the power button, the screen flickered, buzzed, and came to life. The system had recorded in loops, overwriting itself every 30 days, unless someone removed the hard drives. One had been pulled, dated March 2009. He inserted the drive, pressed play, and fast-forwarded. Hours zipped by in seconds. Dust danced in streams of light. Then, movement. At 2:14 a.m. Mac actured a figure exiting the house. The image was grainy, washed in green and gray, but unmistakable. A man in a black cassock, moving with purpose, dragging a burlap sack that sagged with unnatural weight. Abraham's throat tightened as he watched the man stop near the garden, dig with a spade, and lower the sack into the earth. The date stamp read March 28, 2009, the same month Mrs. Langston claimed she saw a pregnant nun at the house. The man in the footage never looked at the camera, but his profile, his height, his build matched Abraham's perfectly. He sat back in the dust-covered chair, heart hammering. Was it possible? Had they drugged him so thoroughly, used his body like a puppet? Or worse, had he done this and forgotten willingly, part of some fractured loyalty to obedience, to shame? He watched the footage again, frame by frame, and noticed something else. As the figure turned briefly, the light caught his face. Just enough, not enough to identify, but enough to see something was off. The eyes, dull, lifeless. Movements, mechanical. Possessed? Hypnotized? Or was this a twin he never knew? A spiritual double, conjured or created? A scapegoat dressed in faith? The questions spiraled, and the room felt suddenly colder. He turned off the monitor and staggered outside. The yard looked different now, no longer benign, but a stage upon which ancient sins had played out under moonlight. And in the wind, he thought he heard a breath. Not his own, not the world's, but hers. The air in the garden hung heavy with unresolved prayers, and Father Abraham stood where the earth had been turned, where Maria, and what should have been their daughter, had once been buried in silence. He pressed the rosary to his lips and whispered her name like scripture, not as a plea, but as a vow. Maria. They had tried to erase her, strip her of voice and motherhood, and wrap her death in holy deception. But the truth had clawed its way back through dirt, documents, and decades. It was no longer enough to grieve. He needed answers, real ones. The search led him through layers of bureaucracy and silence, but it was Lucia again who gave him the final piece. She called, voice urgent, speaking quickly in Italian before switching to English. "She's alive," she said. "The girl. Angelica. They never killed her. They took her from the house, hid her. She ended up at a Carmelite mission in Baton Rouge under a false name." Abraham couldn't breathe. Alive? She's 15 now. They kept her isolated, told her her mother died in childbirth, She remembers a man in black robes, but she's confused. She has dreams. She's asking questions. He drove that night across 3 states, the road a blur, his hands white on the wheel, the rosary wrapped tight around his knuckles like armor. The mission in Baton Rouge was a modest complex, surrounded by high fences and vines, quiet in a way that made the silence feel deeper. A nun met him at the gate, eyes cautious, and led him inside. Angelica was in a small chapel, drawing in a notebook. When he stepped in, she turned, her face sharp, alert. She looked like Maria in the eyes, same intensity, same quiet strength. She didn't speak at first, neither did he. Then she said, "I know you. You're in my dreams." He knelt beside her. She blinked slowly, as if the truth was something that had always been there, just waiting for breath. "They told me you died, or that you never existed." He shook his head, tears pooling. "I existed, and I searched. I didn't know you were alive. They made me forget." She reached out, hand hovering before touching his cheek. "I thought I imagined you. You were always in black, but kind, sad." He told her everything. About Maria, about the church, about what they did to her mother, to him, to both of them. He told her not with bitterness, but with the gravity of someone who had lost everything to lies, and still chose to speak the truth. "I loved your mother," he said. "I was a priest. I was supposed to give my heart only to God. But she was my miracle, and I failed her. They erased my memory, told me what we felt was sin, but they sinned. They killed her, and called it righteous." Angelica listened without flinching. "I want to see her grave," she said. "I want to pray for her myself." So they returned to Georgia, together. The car ride was quiet, filled not with silence, but understanding. At the grave, Angelica laid wildflowers and said nothing for a long time. Then she whispered, "I forgive you." Abraham collapsed to his knees. "I don't deserve it." "Maybe not," she said, "but you're the only one who told the truth." The weeks that followed were full of long conversations and fragile peace. Abraham contacted journalists, attorneys, other survivors of Vatican silence. He released the video from 2005. He released the journals. He spoke publicly, loudly. They defrocked him within a week. He accepted it without resistance. "They took my collar," he told Angelica, "but they can't take the truth." They moved to a small cottage on the edge of the forest, where wildflowers grew without permission and birds returned every spring. He planted a garden again, not to bury, but to grow. And on Sunday mornings, not in vestments, but in plain clothes, he and his daughter prayed beside the earth that had once hidden Maria. They didn't pray for vengeance, they prayed for truth, for light, for peace. "Her name means little angel," Abraham told her once. And Maria, she was Grace. Angelica held his hand and nodded. "Then maybe I'm meant to be both." And he smiled, because despite everything, burial, betrayal, and forgotten blood, something sacred had survived. Not in the church, not in its marble halls or golden chalices, but in her. The daughter of forbidden love, the child they tried to erase. The one who chose forgiveness anyway. If this story gripped you the way it did us, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss the next one. Leave a like if you felt the weight of Father Abraham's journey. I'd love to hear your thoughts. What moment shocked you most, and where are you watching from? Drop a comment below. Let's talk.